Hi, welcome to another Generation session. This is the 10th session on this track, 4 to go. And we have with us Reza Rahman, that comes from Philadelphia, USA, and works for Microsoft. And he's presenting us Jakarta EE on Azure. Hi, Rahman. Reza, how are you?
I'm well, all considering.
Oh, yes. You are showing us Jakarta EE today. So formerly known as Java EE, was rebranded, renamed to Jakarta EE, and has a few new things that you want to show us.
Right. So this presentation is basically about how do you run a Jakarta EE application on Azure as a cloud. So the specific examples I'll be showing is about Azure, but in general, you can take these lessons and apply it to most clouds. Most clouds have a similar, some kind of equivalent of what I'm going to show. But basically, there's three or four different ways that you can run a Jakarta EE application on Azure. You can run it on virtual machines. You can run it through PaaS or managed services. You can run it through Docker, and you can run it through Docker and Kubernetes. So these are the different variations that I'll be talking about. And basically, instead of just talking about it, I'll actually be doing the things, right, live coding wise in about 50 minutes, and that'll give you a real idea of how the thing looks like, as opposed to just talking about it.
Okay, looking forward to see it.
Alrighty, so thank you everyone for joining. Even if you're not joining live, if you're joining in recording, welcome. So this session is Jakarta EE on Azure. The thing about this session is I don't really have any presentation, no slide deck whatsoever. It's completely slide free. There's not even a single slide deck in this presentation. But what I do have, I think, is much more valuable. So I'll tell you a little bit about this talk. So all of the materials for this talk is actually on GitHub. It's in the URL. As you see there, hopefully I'll work with the event host to make this URL available to you. This material actually is a whole day workshop. So I run this material as an 8-hour workshop where people actually take the instructions on this GitHub URL and execute these instructions over a 6 to 8 hour period. So obviously I won't have 6 to 8 hours to present this. I'll only have 50 minutes. So what I'm going to do is give you enough information about this repository so that you know what's going on, and at a high level you have the conceptual understanding of what's going on, and also show you a little bit hands-on few sections of this workshop. The idea being that you're going to come back and take the knowledge that I give you in the next 15 minutes or so, and explore further this repository on your own. So that's the basic idea. So there's several different steps to this workshop. The first step is always the most basic, and that is getting things up and running locally. So that is in the Jakarta EE folder. So in the Jakarta EE folder, I actually have step-by-step instructions on how to get things going. I did cheat a little bit just for the interest of time. So I'll tell you the things that I've already set up. So on my local machine, I already have a JDK 8 set up. I'm using Adopt OpenJDK hotspot. I've also set up Payara. Payara is the app server I'm using for my Jakarta EE 8 demos. You don't have to use Payara. I've run this same demo with Liberty as well, for example. So any kind of Jakarta EE application, and I've also run it with Wildfly. So any kind of Jakarta E8 runtime, which is there's a fair amount out there, you can use to run this demo. But for this particular demo, I've chosen Payara. And I'll actually, you'll see it when you go to the PaaS section, you'll understand why I chose Payara for this demo. But I basically have Payara all set up and ready to go. I'm using Eclipse. You don't have to use Eclipse. I know a lot of people use IntelliJ. Some people use VS Code. Some people use NetBeans. You can use whatever you want as long as it recognizes a Maven project and can work with a Maven project. The project in the end is just using just a Maven directory structure, nothing much more than that. There's nothing IDE specific. But I'm using Eclipse for my demo. I'll be using Docker throughout, actually. I'll tell you why I'm using Docker, even to run things locally, in a second. But you don't have to use Docker if you don't want to. You could use basically the native executables for the runtime as well. And you'll need the repository, this repository code. So I do have the repository code downloaded on my local machine as well. So the application that we'll be demoing throughout is a Jakarta EE application. It's a CRUD-based application. It basically is a database front end that does very simple create, read, update, delete functionality. So obviously you need a database of some kind to get this application running. I happen to be using Postgres. Again, you don't have to use Postgres. You can use whatever you want. I could have installed Postgres locally. The reason I'm not doing that is because I don't do anything much with Postgres other than doing these demos. So in these situations, a really handy thing to do actually is just to use Docker to run whatever software you need, in this case, Postgres. Docker will actually come in much more handy when we talk about the Docker portion of this demo or the Kubernetes portion of this demo. So either way, we'll need Docker, so might as well just start with Docker. So the first thing I'm going to do is start the database. So here's a command to run the database, and you can follow the step-by-step instructions on how to do this. I'm just going to do a real clear here, get rid of the stuff that I was doing before. I'm copying, pasting this this command. I'll explain to you what precisely this command is doing. Okay, so if you haven't seen Docker before and you haven't seen the commands, it's useful to talk a little bit about the syntax. So Docker run means run a Docker image. IT means run this in an interactive mode, meaning I don't want it to run in the background. I don't want to run it in the foreground. RM means I have no use for this image other than just running it this one time. So that's why I'm using RM. I'm giving it a name. You don't have to give it a name, but it's useful to give it a name. You lose this window and you need to know what the name of the running image is. I'm giving it a sensible name. I won't talk about the -v option too much. Basically, what this is doing is, because this is a database, I need a real file system. I can't just depend on Docker. The Docker file system will go away once the database is shut down. So I need to mount a volume on my local system to say, hey, Docker, please use this file system instead of yours, so that when I shut down this image, the data that I enter into Postgres doesn't go away. Finally, I am using -p 5432. I'll explain what this is. So one of the things that you will learn when you are working with Docker, actually the most complex thing is Docker networking. So when I run these Docker images, they actually run within their own subnet within my own machine. So it's almost a virtual subnet within my own machine. And they have their own IP addresses within this little network on its own. And this internal network is not accessible to me, even on my local host. So this is, by default, if I just run a Docker image, it is in its own little networking world. So in order for me to access this Postgres instance running within this Docker image, I need to expose a port. And I know that the Postgres port is 5432. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm saying, hey, run this image and make port 5432 available so that I can access it from my local machine. And finally, Postgres is the name of the image on Docker Hub. So I'm running the official Postgres Docker image. So let's run it. So the image has already been downloaded here. So I just am up and running on the database. I have a running database listening on port 5432 for me. So again, you can go through the further instructions, and the next step is to set up the application in your IDE. So I've already done that. I've cheated here a little bit and make sure all of the setup is done. So basically, you need to make sure Eclipse is properly set up. You need to install Payara on your local machine. You need to make sure Payara is installed within the IDE. You need to do some very minor setup of Payara to make sure that the Postgres jar file is registered with Payara. So Payara knows how to talk to Postgres. So it's just a single command that you need to issue in order for that to happen. The rest of this is basically just importing the image into the IDE and running it. And basically, that's what I'll be doing. So all of the stuff is basically done. You can definitely feel free to go through these steps and do it yourself. But let me just show you the end result. So the end result is here. Here's my Maven application. Here's Payara. Payara is shut down. Let me just start Payara. Actually, I'll start Payara on the fly. It's just as fast. So this is basically a Java 8 application. I won't go through the application too much. It's basically using CRUD. It is using JSF on the front end, but I also have a REST interface. So the JSF interface actually behaves much like an Angular application or a JavaScript application would do. Instead of making server-side invocations, it actually makes REST invocations to invoke the endpoints. It's an interesting enough application. I won't spend too much time on it because that's not the main focus of our talk today. But this is just to let you know, just a plain vanilla Jakarta EE application. It's got nothing to it other than Jakarta EE, and the only one dependency is on Jakarta EE APIs. If you haven't seen that before, so this is not Java EE, it's Jakarta EE, but the API is basically the same. And if you look into the code, I'm still using the Javax packages. So first thing I'm going to do is just clean this application just to make sure there's nothing in here from before. So I'll do a Maven clean. And it's a success. I just deleted the target directory. That's all that happened here. Next, I'm going to do a Maven build. And inside of Eclipse, there's no package option. There's install. So I'm just going to run install. Okay, and nothing too fancy. At the end of the day, all that happened here is that I built the Jakarta EE war file within this directory. That's all. That's all I did. Right? So that's all that happened. So very normal Java EE development. I'm going to now run this application within Payara. So I'm going to say run on server, and this application is already configured to run on Payara. I did that setup beforehand. Okay, and let's hope the demo gods are in my favor. You know how demos go, right? Whenever you do something in a demo, something goes wrong. Yeah, everything is okay, Bruno?
Yes. It's idling a bit in there.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, this is how it is. I'm sure my virus scanner decided to start do virus scanning right now, right, as I'm doing the demo. So yeah, just give it a second, and hopefully Eclipse will catch up, and Payara will catch up in a second too. There it goes.
So okay, here it is.
Yep. And yeah, normally this just takes a few seconds. Like I said, I'm pretty sure this is how demos go, right? Whenever you expect something to go well, there's always some hiccup.
Yeah, usually when you are presenting, the CPU is clogged, and also the bandwidth is takes a hit with the upload of the video.
Yep, and normally this is all the time that it takes. So the application should be starting up now. It should open up in the browser. There it is. I don't really like the built-in browser for Eclipse. I'm going to just put it out in the real browser. Okay. All these menus are getting in the way a little bit, but let me do this. And there's the application. It's nothing really too fancy. Let me do some stuff with it. So I'll just enter some information. Interesting. And of course, there's something else that always goes wrong when you're trying to do this kind of stuff. So I think what's happening here is I need to do AT as my port. Okay, let me try this one more time. I swear to you, this was all working beforehand, and now something has gotten messed up. I'm not sure why. So let me
don't worry.
Stop this and okay, and let me restart. Let me try to run it one more time, see what actually happened. Okay, this time we will try to make sure to see what exactly Eclipse is telling us. So it's a little bit weird because this shouldn't be running on port 80. First of all, it's a little strange that it's trying to do that.
Seems to be there.
Right, but the data isn't there for some reason. I'm not really sure why that is. So target cafe is unresolvable. Okay, all right. I'm not going to worry too much about this. Running it locally is just the beginning of the demo anyway. I'm sure there's some kind of setting that is going wrong with Pyara that I can debug later. But let's move forward. I think let's not worry too much about it. I think this will resolve itself when we move to the cloud. So that's about it. I mean, it's relatively simple to run this sort of applications, locally. I think we do this all the time. So that's not too terribly exciting, I hope. But the more interesting part is running it on the cloud. Right. So let's begin to do that. So I'll go in the repository once again and go to Jakarta EE Azure. So that's the first step, is getting this to run locally, which for some odd reason I'm unable to do. But let's forget about that for a second. And what we're going to do is focus on the next step, which is running this on the cloud. Okay, so there's many different ways of running this in the cloud, as I mentioned. So one option is virtual machines. So that's in the IaaS folder here. So in the IaaS folder, basically it's similar to what you would do locally if you had your own data center, except for, in this case, the machines will be running on Azure. Obviously, there's some other complexities around there. For example, the infrastructure will come from Azure, like storage, load balancing, so on. But by and large, from an application developer standpoint, it's not that different from local development or local data center on-premise development. You'll see that in a second when I show you. So the IaaS is a good way to get started if you're just getting started with the cloud, in my opinion. So the next highest level of abstraction is PaaS, or managed services. So in this scenario, you basically treat infrastructure as a service, right? So your entire application is a service. So what you'll ideally have is a running version of the runtime that you want. Now, on Azure today, we don't have a managed Java EE server, but what we do have is a managed Java SE server, a managed Java SE service. So that means you can spin up a JVM just by doing some point-and-click experience. And above and beyond that, what I've done is I've gotten it running using Pyara Micro. So you can use Pyara Micro and embed it within a Java SE, managed Java SE runtime, and download a var on it, and it will work basically like a PaaS. So I won't show you the PaaS option today because it's a little bit more involved, and honestly, it's not the most popular option for some reason. Another option is running it just through Docker. Right? So you can containerize your application and run it through Docker. But let's say you don't want to use Kubernetes. So Azure actually allows you to do that, and so does some other major clouds, where you can just use Docker as a container and deploy your application to the cloud in a containerized fashion. The way Azure does this is something called ACI, or Azure Container Instances. I do have a demo for that as well. You should feel free to take a look at it. But the one that I will show you, and where I will end this presentation, is taking this entire application and running it in a Kubernetes-based environment. And that is also very much possible using Azure. Azure has a Kubernetes service, a fairly popular one. And actually, this happens to be the most popular option for at least for Java applications. Kubernetes is hugely popular. And it's very, very simple to run a Jakarta EE application on Kubernetes. I'll show you how to do it. But the difference here is that it's a slightly higher level abstraction from IaaS, but not as high as PaaS. So it's something between a PaaS and an IaaS experience. Okay. So the first thing is, let me show you the very basics, just to make the point, just to show you really that if you're not used to the cloud is nothing to be worried about. It's actually very, very simple and really not that scary whatsoever. So on the cloud, you will need a database also. In the cloud, I've showed you, so instead of running it through Docker, running the database through Docker, I'm going to just use a database on the cloud. So we do have a managed service for databases. In fact, we happen to have a managed service for Postgres. So I'm just using that. So I've cheated a little bit, and I've all of the instructions on how to do that is documented here. But I've cheated a little bit, and I've gone ahead and created it. Right. So this is my cafe group. So Azure operates on the concept of resource groups. Think of a resource group as sort of like a data center abstraction. So this is your virtual data center on the cloud. And in here, I've created two separate things ahead of this presentation to save time. One is the database. So this is a Postgres database. I'll click on that in a second. And as you can see, it's Azure managed Postgres server, right? It's already up and running. There's been some activity. I've been trying to run the demos in the morning. That's why I have a little bit of activity here. We see a lot of good that did me. I can't even run the thing now. Okay, so that's there. And I've also cheated and I've created the Kubernetes cluster behind the scenes ahead of time also. So here's my Kubernetes instance. I actually haven't done very much with the Kubernetes. Let's take a look. I'll show you. So if you look into insights, you won't see a lot of activity. There's some activity, but not a lot. Right? I've not really done much with it, but it's sitting there already created for me. But what I have not created, just to show you how the creation experience looks like, is the actual machine where we're going to do the deployment. So we're going to do that next. So what I'm doing here is just creating a virtual machine on the cloud. I'm going to be using Ubuntu as my operating system. You can use whatever operating system you want. I'm choosing to use Ubuntu. So let's go ahead and get started. So the way you do that is you simply say create a resource. And under compute is where you have all of the VM options. And you see that Ubuntu is actually a relatively popular option. You happen to be using Ubuntu 16. You can use 18 if you want. It doesn't matter. So I'll just pick Ubuntu 16. And this will present me a dialog to go ahead and create the virtual machine. The virtual machine will be created under a resource group. I've already have the resource group created. So I'm just going to pick that one, Jakarta EE Cafe group. I have to give the virtual machine a name. Okay, so I'm going to give it the name from here. All right. I'm going to create it in the East US. So we have a number of data centers across the world. You'll see a number of options here. I'm going to pick the one that's closest to me, which is US East. I'm going to take the defaults here. Really nothing much more, not a very big deal here. I'm going to select the size. The size is a little bit pricey. $70 a month is a little bit much. Just for this demo, I don't want such an expensive machine. So I'm going to pick a slightly cheaper machine. This one is general purpose. It's got one CPU. Let's actually pick the $30 one. I don't want to be that cheap either. So we'll pick the $30 option and hit select. So that's that one. $30 a month is not bad. Normally in a production environment, you would want to use SSH keys. For the demo, I'm just going to keep it simple and I'm going to use a password. I'm going to use the Azure user option. I'm going to give it a name here. So the name I'm going to use is Payara. Okay, I'm going to give it a password. Password is actually a little bit complicated, and they keep changing the requirements on me on this as well. So let's hope my chosen password is good enough. Yes, it is. And in order for this machine to be useful, I need to open up some ports, right? Otherwise, why am I even bothering creating the machine first? So I will need to open up a SSH port because I need to access this machine after I create it in order to install Payara and everything. I'm also going to open up port 80 and port HTTPS. Okay, and I think that's all I really need to do with this machine. I'm going to just create it. Okay, the validation has been passed. I'm going to hit create. And this is a step that takes time, right? So it's definitely much faster compared to what you would have done if you were doing this in your own data center. That's for sure, right? I mean, if you're going to allocate a new machine or even a new VM on your data center, it will probably take you at least hours, maybe days to do this. So this will take, it depends on your subscription. In this case, I'm just using a very normal subscription. So this is probably going to take about 15 to 20 minutes or so. While this is going on, we're just going to go ahead and look ahead to see what we're going to do next, right? Just to save us some time. So after I create the machine, the next thing I'm going to need to do is SSH into this machine. So I'm going to, after I do this, I'm going to have a public IP whereby I can access this machine. I'm going to log on to this machine via SSH. And I'm going to do the normal steps that I would do if I was given a machine on, let's say, my on-premise data center, right? So the machine is nothing much more than Ubuntu. So I need to do whatever I need to do to get this machine up and running and ready to run Payara. So normally, the first thing you'll need to do is update the operating system. As you can see, this is Ubuntu 16, so it's a little bit older. It's always going to be the case like that. Whenever you're running something on the cloud, you're probably not going to get the latest version of the OS. So it's always a good idea to do an update. After that, I'm going to install Java. Right, I'm just going to install the OpenJDK version of JDK 8. That's all I need for Jakarta EE applications. On this machine, I will install Maven. Normally, you won't install Maven on a machine. What you will do is you'll have a separate CI/CD pipeline where your application is built, and then you deploy the application to the virtual machine. In this case, just to keep it simple, I'm going to download the code onto this machine and actually build it locally. So that's why I'll be installing Maven. I'll be getting a Payara downloaded onto this machine as well. And Payara installation is very, very simple. You just get the zip file and you unzip it, and that's it. I'll also download my application. I'll unzip my application and then do a Maven install to build the application on this local machine. And then what you'll notice is that I opened up port 80, and that was basically the only option available. Okay, so it looks like my deployment is complete. I'm going to just go through the steps. I went through about halfway through to explain to you what I was going to do next. So let's go to the resource. So in here, there's a handy connect tab. It's actually very useful. I don't actually need this. I know what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to follow my own instructions. So I'm going to copy this command here. I'm going to open up a command line. Copy the command, and I'm going to get the public IP for this machine. I know that the username is Payara because I gave it that name. So I'm just going to copy. You see the public IP address, and I'm going to just copy the public IP address. Okay. Yes. And I'm going to log on with my password. And there you have it. This is basically, it's now as though this is the same experience as you would have on your own data center or even on your local physical machine. So I am logged on, as you can see in the prompt, Jakarta EE Cafe server. So I'm logged onto the remote server on Azure. I now have a machine on Azure that I can do basically whatever I want with. So let's go ahead and begin to install the application. So as I'm installing the application, I'll also tell you, this is not really what you would do. This is a good beginner-friendly experience to show you how simple it is. But if you're going to do this in production in Azure, you can use something called an ARM template. And what the ARM template allows you to do is all of these individual instructions that I am issuing by myself, you can automate all of that in a single script called an ARM template. And even beyond that, Azure has this capability called a marketplace entry, where a vendor will do all of the setup for you. So a vendor will tell you, hey, do you want a copy of JBoss? Well, just click on this link, and I will create all of the things that you need to do in order to get JBoss up and running on Azure virtual machines. But we're not going to do that. We're going to keep it a very, very simple for this initial demo. So let's get our initial command in here. So sudo apt update. And this usually doesn't take long. It's fairly quick. Okay, that's done. Then we're going to do an install of the JDK. This does take a little bit longer. This is probably the longest thing that's going to take, other than allocating the physical machines. Yes.
So Reza, while we wait, isn't there an option on Azure where you have like a base machine that already has a pre-installed Java, for example?
Absolutely. It's so that's what I was saying is a solution templates. So it's not just Java. It's actually even above and beyond that. So for example, we have let's take a good example is WebLogic. So we work with Oracle so that there is a solution template in the marketplace that you can just point and click and say, hey, I want one instance of WebLogic, or I want 5 instances of WebLogic. And all of that will be actually configured for you from the operating system level up, with the proper stack, the proper JDK version, the proper setup, the proper configuration, including domain management and cluster management capabilities. So this is the principal way I'm doing it this way is to show you the cloud is not at all scary. It's actually can be very, very similar to what you would do in a local environment. In fact, a lot of the newer clients or customers that are very new to the cloud, they go this route, right? They don't want anything fancy. They just want a virtual machine and they want to do their own setup. And you can absolutely do that. But yeah, above and beyond that, you can use just to give you one step above. You can automate all of these things that I'm doing using something called an ARM template. And if you don't want to do that, you can also use Azure Marketplace Solutions, which is exactly what I think you were trying to say, is basically pre-built images, pre-built solutions of all of these things.
Yes.
Right, so right now we just did an install of Maven. Next, we're going to install Payara. Okay, so that's done. We'll just do a wget, and I'm going to make sure I'm in the right directory, which I should be. Yes, I am. I'm in the home directory at the moment. Okay, and that's done. For some reason, Ubuntu does not come with unzip install, so I'm just going to install unzip and then unzip the zip file.
Yeah, I think it's because of the licensing.
Possibly, yes. Okay, so and then I'm going to unzip Payara. Okay, and so I do have a working install of Payara at this point. I'm going to download my application. And I think there's a leading space in there I need to get rid of. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I need to specify my GitHub repo, that's all. Okay, so I have a couple of files in here, my Payara install as well as my my application. I'm going to unzip my application. I have my application handy as well. So now I basically need to do a Maven install. So I'll move into the directory and do a Maven install. So here's my Jakarta EE master. In here I have a Jakarta EE. Oh, rather that's not it. Apologize. I believe I need to go into the IaaS folder. Hold on a second. Let me make sure I am giving you the proper instructions. Yes. So I need to fix these instructions a little bit. So we're not going to move into the Jakarta EE cafe directory. We're going to move into the IaaS directory. So move one level up. Okay. And in the IaaS directory, I should have another copy of this application. Okay, so I'll make sure to update that. That's not really accurate. Sorry, caps lock on. So I'll do a Maven install here. Okay, I have build success. I'm going to go back to the home directory. All right. Now I'm going to do, I need to, because I have to run this application on port 80, which is, I'm surprised is what's happening locally. And locally it should have run on port 8080, not port 80. But because I need to run this application on port 80, I need sudo permission, right, to do the rest of my tasks. So that's what I'm going to do next. So I'm going to just sudo su. Okay, so I'm in the same directory as before. So I have all the same files. I just did a sudo, that's all. So the first thing I need to do is I'm going to start the domain, right? Because there's a few bits of configuration that I need to do. By default, Pyara runs on port 8080. I need to make it run on port 80. So in order to do that, I need to first start the Pyara domain. So let's do that. Okay, so the domain is now started. Next, I'm going to ask Pyara to run on port 80 as opposed to running on port 8080. So I'm going to run this asadmin command to instruct it to do so. Right. So it should be running on port 80 at this moment. I won't test it out just for the for the interest of time. My next step is to install the Postgres library onto Pyara. So that's what I'm going to do next. And I need the domain to be running in order to do that. Okay, so the library is added successfully. Next, I'm going to actually deploy the application. Okay, and the deployment is telling me it is successful. So now I should be able to go to the public repository of this server, and it's telling me Pyara is up and running. Instead of running Pyara, I'm going to run the application itself. So let's hope that this time it is working, and I haven't introduced some kind of bug by mistake. No, the application is running. I can add one more coffee here. Let's add another one. You can delete one. Let's delete the first one I created. So on. So it's just basically a CRUD application. I need to see what was going on locally that I couldn't do that. It's probably just a hiccup of some kind because I was trying to run the application before. But basically, that's it, right? So as you can see, the cloud and Jakarta EE does not need to be anything scary, right? So we have a lot of applications that are running this way. It's basically almost the same as running it on premise. There's going to be much more Azure infrastructure as you go ahead. As I said before, you can use ARM templates, you can use marketplace solutions, you can use load balancers, managed databases that we are using, all kinds of managed services, but it's not scary. So the next step that I'm actually going to show you physically is doing the same thing using Kubernetes and seeing how that experience actually differs. So again, you're going to need to create a managed Postgres instance. Okay, so the steps are right there. It's already created. I don't have to do anything. You need to set up a Kubernetes cluster. It's already done, right? So if I go here and take a look at this, I've already gone through this step. So this is how the Kubernetes looks like in the Azure console. So I have a set of node pools. There should be about 3. Yeah, there's three nodes that are up and running for me. There should be some insights I can take a look at. Right, so these are the insights right at this moment, right? So you can see the CPU utilization, memory utilization, and hopefully we get to see these change in a second also. So there's all kinds of information about this Azure Kubernetes instance that you can get from the Azure console. But beyond that, let's now take this application and get it running. So the first thing you need to do in order to get all of this going is, so first of all, let me exit out of this VM. Right, so that's exiting out of SU, exiting out of this machine. So I'm on my local machine now. So I've already set up kube control. So this kube CTL, if you haven't seen this before, this is basically the command line that allows you to connect up to your running Kubernetes instance. So in this case, my Kubernetes instance is running on Azure. I've already issued this command here to connect up my local kube control instance with the running instance on the Azure cloud. So I am basically connected to the Azure cloud on my local machine right now. So I can show you that. So I can say kube control get nodes. Okay, and it's telling me that there are 3 different machines pools that are ready to run. If I do pods, there'll be no pods. So that means I have a set of nodes ready to go, but I haven't actually deployed anything to this machine yet. So if I do services, the only service that will be running is Kubernetes itself. But other than that, there's no other services running either. So let's now take that same Java EE application and get it to run. So the first thing you need to do in order to do all of this containerization stuff is that you still need your WAR file, right? And if you're going to use it in a Java EE fashion, that's what you need. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to build that WAR file. So let's go ahead and do that. So in here, let's go to where I have this application installed first of all on my local machine. Okay, and let's go to the Kubernetes folder. Under the Kubernetes folder, I have another copy of this application running. So let's go ahead and build that. Say mvn clean install. You can do this from the IDE if you want. You don't have to do it from here. I'm just going to do it from the command line. Okay, great. So I have that built. So I have a running Maven application, running WAR file. So that's my first step. The next step is I now need to create a Docker file from this. I need to Dockerize my application. So the main objective of Dockerizing my application is ultimately to upload it onto Docker Hub or some kind of other repository, because Kubernetes is running on the cloud. It cannot access my local machine. So I need to build my Docker image and upload it on the cloud somewhere. So the first thing I'm going to do is just make sure that I am logged onto Docker. So by doing Docker login, and I am, because I did this in the morning. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to build my Docker image, and I'll show you what is going on in this Docker image as we build it. But let me build the Docker image for you. So I'm going to need it to give it my Docker Hub ID in the build image itself. So I'll do that. Okay. So the image is built, but let me show you how this looks like in case you haven't seen it before. So let's compare and contrast this Docker image to how we built the IaaS example. Okay, so in the IaaS example, basically what we did was we built everything from the ground up, but we don't need to do that here. Basically, we can abstract all of this through Docker. So in this line, it's encapsulating all of the things that we had done before: the operating system, the Java install, everything is done through here. All we really need to do is deploy the WAR file. That's all. Copy the Postgres jar file. We need that to connect up to the database, and deploy the WAR file, and that's it. That's all you need to do. There's 4 distinct commands that are in this Docker image, and that's it. So now that we have the Docker image, we're going to go ahead and upload this Docker image to my Docker Hub. And the way you do that is through Docker push. So let's do a Docker push. And since I did this in the morning, it should go relatively fast, right? So the image is now pushed over. Now I can use this image within Kubernetes to do my actual deployment. I'm going to do that next. So I only need to issue just one Kubernetes deployment file. I'll show you how this deployment file looks like. But let's first run it. So that's created. It's already super fast. So next, I'm going to see what was created. In order to do that, I'm going to do another get services, but this time I'm going to watch. Actually, let's be adventurous. I'm going to drop the watch portion and simply do the same command that I did before, kube control get services. Okay, so the external ID is not done yet. Okay, so I need to wait for the external ID to happen. So I do need to add the watch command here. Oh, external ID is assigned. Okay, so we're going to take this external ID, and now we should be able to access this cluster. Actually, it's not just a single instance of Payara. There's actually two instances of Payara, front-ended by a load balancer that I can now access. And before I do that, let me show you the actual YAML file configuration. The YAML file configuration in this case is not that complicated, in my opinion. So you're describing a deployment. You're giving it a name, Jakarta EE Cafe, so you can reference it properly. This is all has to do with the same thing. The replicas 2 means there's 2 copies of whatever image that you are running. There's 2 copies of it running. And then finally, we give it the image location. Okay, so if you look in my local instance of YAML file, I've already changed this to point to my Docker Hub account. And I'll show you my Docker Hub account in a second too. But basically what I'm saying is, take whatever image that I created for you and make 2 copies of it and deploy it onto Kubernetes. Okay, and in front of that, these images that you are creating, I want you to create a load balancer. And in this case, I don't have to ask Payara to run on port 8080. Payara can keep running on port 8080. I'll simply say that the load balancer is going to run on port 80 instead. So let's do another command that we did before, and let's do get pods. Okay, and in this case, you'll notice that there's 2 pods. These are pods, the instances of my image, and they're both on ready state and they're both in running state. So now I'm going to go back to the external IP and access it. Okay, and there's 1 copy of one of the instances of Payara is responding of the 2. And there you have it. It's the application that is fully up and running. It's fully capable, and it's running on Kubernetes on Azure on the cloud. Similarly, I encourage you to take a look at. So let's see if we can see some activity on the Azure Insights. Usually there's a little bit of a lag time. The data doesn't show up immediately. Yeah, so it hasn't showed up yet, but it will show up here. We will see that there is a little bit of a memory spike due to that one request that I made. Maybe I'll try that in a second. But going back to my GitHub URL, the eCafe, you can try all of the other different options as well, right? You can try the Docker ACI option. It's very similar to the Kubernetes steps that I went through, but it's a little bit simpler because you don't actually have Kubernetes, you just have Docker. And definitely try out the PaaS option. It's also very interesting. Even though we don't have a managed Java EE server on Azure yet, I still think we have pretty good capabilities in terms of PaaS and cloud as well. So I think that's about it. I encourage you to take a look at this on your own. Let's try refreshing this. Let's see if our activity shows up yet. No, not yet. It usually takes a few minutes to make a change for the data to actually show up here. I don't think we'll have that kind of time. Okay, so let me stop. Actually, let me not stop sharing my screen. I have just a couple of minutes, so we're almost out of time. Let me take any questions in the next 2 minutes or so. But other than that, that's it. Right? I hope you enjoyed it. I hope this gives you an idea of how easy it is to get Jakarta EE applications running on the cloud.
Thanks very much, Reza. We don't have any questions right now. I don't know if the folks want to post some of them, but I have some comments. So everything you used here is on Azure, and it's owned by Microsoft, and you deployed everything using Ubuntu, and I find that amazing.
No, absolutely. I mean, to be honest with you, we have a lot of non-Windows, what we call non-traditional workloads on Azure. So it's definitely not just about C# and .NET and whatnot. We're doing in my opinion, we actually have better Java support than any other major cloud. Right. So I think there are smaller clouds that offer better Java support. But in terms of the major clouds, I really believe that we are the best in terms of what we do for Java developers.
So with this demo that you have, you will be able to test different ways to deploy your application. In this case, it's a Jakarta EE based application, but in fact, it can be any kind of Java application.
Very true. Yeah. So, I mean, what I showed you in general is applicable across clouds, I think, for the most part, and also across different types of Java application, and even maybe different types of applications altogether, right? So, in general, you can apply these same sorts of trade-offs to any technology running on Azure for sure, and running on the cloud.
Okay. Thanks very much, Reza. It was a pleasure to have you here. I don't know if you can travel next year to our conference and be here live, but if you can, we're glad to have you here as well.
I would love to do it. I've never been to, been in your part of the world. Actually, that's not true. I've been through basically the capital cities, but that's about it. I'd love to spend some more time and talk to people in person, get a feel for the culture. So I appreciate the invite. Hopefully, we can make it happen. And either way, thank you for having me anyway.
Thanks very much, Reza, and stay safe.
Okay, bye for now.